Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Tech Justice Podcast. This is a show about technology, society, ethics, and everything in between. I'm Jaden.
And I'm Murat. This episode is the second in our Tech Justice series on recommendation algorithms and misinformation. Last episode, we introduced recommendation algorithms and shared their history and evolution into the modern age. Today, we pick up where we left off, with the rise of misinformation in the age of recommendation algorithms. This is Recommended Lies.
If you recall our conversation in the previous episode, we just finished introducing this idea that recommendation algorithms are economically incentivized to push content that is emotionally provocative, sensational, and novel.
And in this way, we can broadly say that these algorithms favor engagement over other qualities. One of these negatively impacted qualities, of course, being the accuracy of information shared. This idea is supported by a 2021 analysis of the effects of recommendation algorithms on the amplification of misinformation by Dr. Miriam Fernandez, where she and her co-authors say, quote, "In general, good results for recommendations are obtained when producing popular but slightly personal results for each user, even though the utility of such recommendations is very limited, and hence there is a trade-off between novel, diverse, and popular items," unquote. We've all heard the stories from the past decades surrounding this rise in misinformation. Rampant fake news surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic and natural disasters, and the rise of QAnon, among other conspiracies.
A new investigation from the Washington Post reveals how doctors who pushed medical misinformation, particularly about dangerous alleged COVID remedies, faced few, if any, repercussions.
At misinformation and conspiracy theories surrounding the last storm, Helene. Rumors about the federal response to that hurricane have been circulating on social media, many of which have also been spread by Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump.
There is a lot of false information circulating on social media surrounding FEMA and their role providing resources for those affected by Helene.
Bogus information is spreading online. We saw claims the Hollywood sign was in flames, looters were calmly walking out of homes with TVs, and confusion over a picture that's not even from California. Scammers are feeding on this misinformation, trying to take advantage of victims.
The report found the instant messenger platform Telegram has enabled QAnon to spread anti-Semitism and conspiracies with very little fear of moderation from platform administrators.
Let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic as a case study for a minute. Starting at the tail end of 2019 in China and becoming a topic of international concern in early 2020, COVID-19 was the very first pandemic where the latest information about the disease was spread primarily through the vector of social media. After the implementation of quarantine at home and mask mandates across many nations, many people became fatigued with the influx of information from news sources as well as health agencies.
And the series of events that occurred next would fundamentally change the course of the pandemic in the United States, greatly influence the outcome of the presidential election, and forever alter our society's relationship with science in what would ultimately be known as the infodemic. A 2023 analysis of COVID-19 mis- and disinformation by Blanka Kotseva and Irene Vianini identified a variety of narratives that emerged during the 3-year period between 2020 and 2023. The first that I want to focus on was a narrative that was based on, quote, criticism of restrictions and claims of authoritarianism in dystopia, unquote. The authors found that of almost 59,000 articles posted in that 3-year period, 30% spread anti-lockdown narratives, portraying lockdowns as dangerous infringements on the rights of American citizens, even arguing that the lockdowns pose a greater health risk to society than the disease itself, and even going so far as to claim that doctors and scientists were against lockdowns, which is categorically false. Another common narrative was the anti-mask narrative, where, again, articles would make claims of infringements on civil rights and that masks didn't prevent the spread of disease. Lastly, there was the conspiracy theory narrative, claiming that the virus was developed in a virology lab in Wuhan, China, where it breached containment. Rumors were spread of a mysterious Wuhan collaborator who had blown the whistle on a killer virus being engineered in China.
And so, in the aftermath of all these narratives spread on social media, was a large portion of the American population becoming distrustful of our scientific institutions, our country's leadership, specifically within the CDC, and a new wave of racism against Asian Americans for their supposed conspiracy to weaken the United States. Death threats were made towards Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Pseudoscientific theories were being spread about how to treat the disease using yogurt and whiskey, and the drugs hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were for a short period being shilled by the President of the United States as a possible cure for the disease before any meaningful trials had been done. It got to the point where in one research study titled Misinformation, Trust, and Use of Ivermectin and Hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19, conducted by Roy H. Perlis, Christine Lunds Trujillo, and others, of 438 people from across the U.S., 6% had admitted to using one of these drugs.
So let's get real for a minute. During this period, there was so much fear surrounding things like geopolitics and the economy and people's health, and so what people were really demanding during this time was information. Uncertainty is something that we all try to avoid if we can. We all want some level of control over our own lives, but if the alternative is to resign ourselves to the commands from on high, I can kind of see how a lot of people may begin to feel wary. When there's a lot happening and the situation is changing at unprecedented rates, all the while real fact-check information is slow to emerge, a sort of vacuum develops. There is an inflated demand for information surrounding the most current issues, with people flocking to social media for the latest news, and in this moment emerges a prime breeding ground for misinformation.
Right. When there are a lot of problems that keep coming up without easy solutions, people begin to get impatient with scientific processes, and their necessity for methodology and trials and things of that nature. This can be seen in a report from 2022 by Chun-Fung Shi, Matthew So, and others that studied COVID-19 information fatigue on YouTube. Researchers analyzed videos from December 2019 to August 2020 and found that videos shifted from a more scientific lens to a more political lens. They concluded that this suggests to have, quote, intensified the COVID-19 infodemic and may have weakened mitigation measures, unquote.
So all this misinformation is actually getting people hurt. It's causing more people to avoid taking basic safety measures and thus resulting in more infections.
Yeah, that seems to be the main takeaway here. The discourse that happens online and in the media, no matter how rooted it is in factual reporting or science, will have real-life effects.
Let's look at another one of these recent examples. In the days following the landfall of Hurricane Helene in the southeast United States, a 2024 report by Noah Wren and Bradley Fershaw and a report by Melissa Golden from the AP shows how conspiracy after conspiracy popped up on social media. One was that the federal government was intentionally withholding aid from the victims of Hurricane Helene living in majority Republican areas. Another was that the federal government was going to bulldoze some communities to prevent them from rebuilding. And another said that FEMA funds were being redirected to pay for illegal immigrants to cross the border or to send war funds to Israel and Ukraine. And another, even more insane claim made was that the U.S. government had used weather-controlling technology to make the hurricanes hit a Republican area.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And from these few examples of conspiracy theories surrounding the hurricane, we see that they all pretty much paint the federal government as a threat to the citizens of the United States. Unfortunately, these kind of conspiracies could end up harming those affected by these extreme weather disasters, as it could cause them to be more skeptical of receiving aid from the government. On top of that, this all occurred less than 2 months before the 2024 presidential election, and there are quite a few examples of the at-the-time presidential candidate, Donald Trump, repeating these same conspiracies on the campaign trail.
People are dying in North Carolina. They're dying all over those 5-6 states. They're dying, and they're getting no help from our federal government because they have no money, because their money's been spent on people that should not be in our country. They stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants that they want to have vote for them this season. The White House is doing nothing. They've abandoned us. And you know, it's largely a Republican area. They haven't seen anybody from the federal government yet. The federal government isn't there.
So there's clearly a political angle to all this.
Absolutely. By sowing distrust in the incumbent administration, the right wing is able to drive sentiments of fear and hatred towards Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the federal government as an institution, even when these communities are still being ravaged by the extreme flooding and landslides caused by the hurricane.
So then, what about our recommendation algorithms? What was their effect in all this? In my mind, I kind of assume that with recommendation algorithms, known biases for sensational and politically charged content, that the algorithms would be pushing misinformation out at a faster rate than real information. And this seems to be true, according to Dr. Fernandez's research. However, after looking at these few examples of misinformation, I think we've been overlooking a more basal cause of the rise of fake news. That, of course, being people.
Right. People appear to be the ones at the core of all this. They're creating misinformation and fake news in order to push political or social agendas. I know what some of you may be thinking now. What about bots? While it is true that people have programmed robots that use AI to pose as real people on social media, create misleading posts, and make factually incorrect claims in comment sections, some very in-depth research out of MIT suggests otherwise.
Postdoc Suresh Vazohi, Professor Sinan Aral, and Professor Deb Roy conducted a study analyzing 126,000 stories tweeted over 4.5 million times. What they found was that, in all cases, false information would spread faster and farther than true information, and even when controlling for bot activity, the rate of false information spread stayed consistent, indicating that people were the ones creating and retweeting false information more than social media bot accounts. And while the study was done in 2018 before the advent of ChatGPT and other large language model AI tools, and would thus probably have a different outcome today, I think it still says a lot about how individuals don't have the same kind of ethical or professional safeguards and practices as journalists and academics.
Once false or misleading claims are posted on social media sites, recommendation algorithms are unable to distinguish truth from lie. This leaves us with the problematic situation we find ourselves in today, where misinformation is spread readily and freely on the internet with little recourse for correcting it.
So then, what can we do about all this? Clearly, the problem isn't just in the hands of recommendation systems, but they still play a very large role in all this.
And I'm already thinking of some possible solutions. Perhaps we can save those for the next episode. This podcast was created by Murat Aja and Jane Yeager for their Tech Justice class.
If you like what you hear, please consider supporting us on Patreon for just a few bucks. You'll get access to nothing, but I'd really appreciate the free money.
This podcast was edited by Jaden and Murat.
And it was written and produced by Murat and Jaden.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You'll hear us again in the next one.